Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching The Big Picture with me, Frank Rausam Pereira. North and South Korea will hold their first summit in more than a decade on the 27th of April. South Korean officials said on Thursday after North Korean leader Kim Jong-un pledged his commitment to denuclearization as tensions ease between the old foes. South Korean officials who announced the date after high-level talks with North Korean counterparts said the agenda would largely be denuclearization of the Korean peninsula and improving inter-Korean relations. The two Koreas had agreed to hold the summit at the border truce village of Panmunjom when South Korean President Moon Jae-in sent a delegation to Pyongyang this month to meet North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. Thursday's meeting was the first high-level dialogue between the two Koreas since the delegation returned from the north. On this edition of The Big Picture, we will discuss the Korea's summit slated for next month. Joining me on the program today are S.R. Tayal, former diplomat, Harshvi Pant, Head Strategic Studies, Observer Research Foundation, and Smita Sharma of The Tribune. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. Ambassador, I'd like to begin with you. What do you think of the latest development from the Korean Peninsula?
I believe that there are two parallel processes going on now on the Korean Peninsula. One is the relations between North Korea and South Korea, where the two countries, the two leaders want to come together. And in a way, they will try to resume the sunshine policy, which was followed in 2007 and before that by Kim Jong-un's father, Kim Jong-il, and President Moon Jae-in's mentor, the then President Roh Moo-hyun. So this summit will happen. It will certainly have an outcome. It will be a updated version of the sunshine policy, which was followed by their predecessors in a manner of speaking. The other process, the other parallel track objective is denuclearization. That is not the primary objective of South Korea or North Korea. That is the primary objective of United States of America and rest of the world. How much these two processes are somewhat interlinked, but they are independent and they can go together, or one can stop and the other can go. And in that context, if you see we can discuss it later in more detail, but if you see the statements coming from the North Korean side, the word denuclearization has still not been mentioned, whether in the context of the summit of the two Koreas or even after the Kim Jong-un's meeting with Xi Jinping.
Yes.
All the statements where denuclearization word has been mentioned
from China
are either
side.
from South Korea or from China.
Sure. You know, Harshvi Pant, let me bring you into the picture now. Professor, as far as this moment is concerned, what has led to this, to this moment where the summit is finally going to take place after a span of over a decade?
I think a certain realization in the region and in the important stakeholders that North Korea needs to be managed somehow, because the earlier argument that you can contain North Korea, you can somehow make their program dysfunctional, you can either change the regime. I think all of those processes have come to an end, and a realization, especially in South Korea, which as the ambassador pointed out, is now the present government is very keen on taking the sunshine policy forward. I think the realization that something needs to be done to reach out to North Korea, and North Korea has reciprocated because North Korea has played its cards very well. If you look at who has come out the best out of this, it looks as if Kim Jong-un was the best strategist amongst all of the major powers that were playing this game. And somehow he has been able to manage China, America, South Korea, all of them together. Japan is, of course, yet out of the picture, and Japanese are very concerned about this. But that is, they do not fall within that spectrum of inter-Korean relations. But I think the larger question has been that the Trump administration has been equally inept in terms of signaling, because suddenly Trump said, all right, he tweeted that I would welcome these negotiations, and everything changed. Before that, the argument was that we need to get this person out. There were very radical assertions from the administration, especially from Mr. Trump. And then one fine day, it all changed. So I think what we are looking at is...
Professor, but interestingly, it was Putin many months ago who said that we need to engage with Kim Jong-un and not sideline him.
Right. Are you saying that Mr. Trump is taking his lessons from Mr. Putin? Well, he may very well be. But I think, yes, I mean, I think a lot of the countries in the region have been saying this for a long time. But American position for a long time has also been equally steadfast that we will, we need certain conditions to be met before the summit meeting can be held. But suddenly now the summit meeting is being held, which means diplomatically that America is limiting its cards, because if the first thing that you are giving to Kim Jong-un is a summit meeting with Mr. Trump, then it's not very clear how you are going to ratchet up the pressure on him. But be that as it may, we are not talking of that as of now. We are talking of a limited inter-Korean dialogue, which I think is very welcome given the context in which Korean Peninsula has operated over the last few years and decades.
Sure. Let me bring in Smita Sharma now into the picture. The ambassador, Smita, in the beginning of the program said that, there's a two-pronged approach as far as the summit meet itself is concerned. He said that how the North Korean media or any official from North Korea has not spoken about denuclearization, but the rest of the world seems to be speaking about that. So what is it that the summit itself is going to focus on, do you think?
Well, it's definitely, of course, going to focus on the inter-Korean relationship. But the ambassador rightly points out that the larger worry of denuclearization, that's something that's, we will see a build-up happening for it, because we are expecting a possible meeting between Kim Jong-un and Donald Trump as early as May this year. So the way this summit shapes up will also sort of lay the foundation, and all the indications, of course, are building up. Kim Jong-un's secret quiet visit to China, which was announced only after he had visited Beijing, and then we saw the photographs being put out of Xi Jinping with Kim Jong-un. So there are a lot of intricate, in fact, the game of chess being played in the region. On the one hand, when the Koreans think that there would be a better future, especially for South Korea, if they think that they can bring down the heat a few notches. North Korea, of course, has been facing the pinch, the severe pinch of international trade sanctions, wherein even some of the sanctions that were put in by its all-time ally in a way, because it depends on China for its food and energy reserves. Even China had put in place certain sanctions which have now started hurting North Koreans. So for them, it could also be simply about time buying. We do not know how sincere Kim Jong-un is when he comes to the table, what kind of conditions are both sides, or it could just be not just be a two-party talks. It could be a multi-party talks, start with two-party talks, go up into three, have more parties there. And on the other hand, you also have a China which, while it is facing trade sanctions from a Donald Trump administration, it's also worried about what's playing out in its own backyard, which is why Xi Jinping did what he did, where he received Kim Jong-un. This was his first overseas visit in the last 6 years since he's taken control of the Hermit Kingdom. His father and grandfather used to visit China quite regularly. So Xi Jinping also made it clear that, look, as far as the North Koreans are concerned, they might want to talk to Americans directly, but don't forget, we are very much there in the picture and going to be a party or a stakeholder in whatever plays out. Harsh pointed out very correctly that Japanese are very concerned. In fact, the Japanese have been very hawkish on North Korea, especially because 2 of the missiles flew over Hokkaido Islands. So they have also gone quiet since, the kind of, we see the thawing of the temperatures or the coming down of the heat since the Winter Olympics. So this Korean summit is really going to sort of also build a foundation for the other few summits that we will see lining up post that.
Sure, talking about the Kim Jong-un visit to Beijing, Ambassador, is there more to it than meets the eye? Let's not forget the timing of this visit is very crucial, because it's happening before the date of the Korea summit was announced, and also there's this talk of the bilateral between Kim Jong-un and Trump. So is there more to it than meets the eye as far as the visit to Beijing is concerned?
Most certainly. What Kim Jong-un perhaps wants is that somehow the sanctions should be eased, and of course the threat of war which America always poses, that should recede. Now, if you look at the statements, official statements coming from the Chinese side in KCNA after the Xi Jinping Kim Jong-un summit, there are 1 or 2 very crucial sentences. North Korean KCNA has said that the 2 sides agreed on more strategic communication and coordination of strategic policy and actions. That would mean that the 2 sides have discussed exactly what North Korea would be able to offer as a concession and what exactly they will be doing. Now, another, on the Xinhua side, on the Chinese side, they have said that the 2 sides, that North Korea has agreed for nuclearization, or it can be considered if South Korea and America take progressive and synchronous steps to lead in that direction. what would be that progressive and synchronous steps? What will be the, it will not be a unilateral disarmament or denuclearization. North Korea will say three things, in my view. They have three long-standing demands. The American troops should get out of South Korea. All these exercises, military exercises between South Korea and America should cease. And there is a long-standing demand of theirs that the maritime boundary between North Korea and South Korea, which is in any judgment extremely unfair to North Korea, should be renegotiated. So they will put such conditions on the table which the other side will not be able to meet, and the discussions will go on forever. That is my own assessment of the situation.
Okay. You're not being too optimistic as far as
not on the denuclearization side.
Okay, great. You know, Professor, as far as the sanctions itself, you know, the Trump administration has been tom-tomming about these sanctions, and has said that it is because of the sanctions that Kim Jong-un has decided to come to the negotiating table and talk. How badly have these sanctions actually hit North Korea?
See, there is no doubt that sanctions have hurt, and the ratcheted up sanctions that Trump administration did last year has had an impact. Now the question, therefore, for Trump administration is how do you go about using them? And so the argument that they are making to the Trump administration is making to its domestic constituency, and this is an administration that badly needs victories, you know, diplomatic achievements, and they are tom-tomming this because they think that this is an argument that they can, you know, easily make. That look, we were ratcheting up these sanctions, and now North Koreans have come to the negotiating table. It can just be the opposite of what may have happened. That looking at, if you're looking at what perhaps the Chinese have been able to accomplish, and you talked of the, you know, this visit to Beijing and how this has been played out. I think there is no doubt that if you're looking at it from a regional perspective, China comes out much stronger, because here is an argument that look, I'm first going to Beijing. Not only to seek Mr. Xi's blessings, but also to coordinate our actions. Now the negotiations, as I think the ambassador pointed out, will also take place in an environment where Chinese and North Koreans will have coordinated their strategic moves that they were making in the negotiations and outside. So I think the larger matrix that is being played out is very interesting, that you have South Korea, a traditional ally of the Americans, now moving in a direction that makes American position untenable in the short term at least. So I think we are going to witness much more difficult decision making from Washington than we have recognized so far. It's very easy to say, look, he has come to the negotiating table, I'm going to meet him, which Mr. Trump is doing at the moment. But I don't think there is a clear-eyed strategy where you are saying, all right, so if he has come to the negotiating table, now what? And I think that what is going to cause them a lot of concern. What we are hearing now is that Japanese Prime Minister is on his way to Washington, and he'll be telling precisely his concerns about what Americans will be doing.
There are several media reports which have said that the Japanese are willing to have a bilateral with North Korea as well.
Yeah,
so that could also possibly happen sometime in the near future.
Because they are all alone here. Because see, if you look at the traditional ally, America, for a long time that was the guarantor of their security. Now suddenly if Washington is changing its colors, then somehow Japanese will have to come to a modus vivendi with the North Koreans. They have no other option.
Sure. You know, coming back to the summit itself, Smita Sharma, what is it that both the parties would like to walk away with after the summit is over?
Well, I think for now, if both sides are able to show that, you know, none of them was sort of shown down, also perhaps to buy some time. As I said, of course, this is one step. The next step would be the other summits that have to follow. The demilitarized zone where they've chosen, of course, this village, that demilitarized zone by itself, it's surreal because the way it speaks largely about this ambition of a reunification between the two Koreas, and trains running all the way from Pyongyang to Seoul to, you know, joining it to the Trans-Siberian network. That is a very strong populist feeling on the ground, but it's not necessarily one that can translate into pragmatic action going forward. For Kim Jong-un, it's not really about trying to eradicate poverty from his very poor kingdom or to stop the people from hurting because of these sanctions. It's about his own identity. It's about his own survival. And he's perhaps worried at the moment that there is one Donald Trump in the administration. You know, one would have thought that there would have been some sort of a stability in the institutional process process in the world's oldest democracy. Donald Trump seems to have shown that could also be turned topsy-turvy. He now has a new team where instead of a H.R. McMaster or instead, of a Rex Tillerson, he has absolutely hawkish people with very hawkish positions on be it the Iranian nuclear deal or North Korea, people like a John Bolton or, somebody like a Mike Pompeo, who was the CIA chief till recently. And so basically what Trump has done is he has surrounded himself by people who simply would nod and say yes to his bellicosity. There are very few, in fact, sane voices right now in his administration. So if Kim Jong-un is considered a maverick, this is another maverick team, and you never know when they might just actually want to go in for military action if they say, look, we tried for talks, the conditions weren't met, and, we want to actually rain fire and fury. It's not just Kim Jong-un who can do that. So similarly for China, they wouldn't want to see a military action happening in their backyard. Japan wouldn't want to feel isolated at this point in time in the region. So for North and South Korea, I think, at the moment, if they could just keep up the promise of another round of talks, nobody should expect that things are going to sort out in 1 or 2 rounds of talks itself. As long as they can go back from the dialogue table with the hope of another round of talks, the region can perhaps breathe a little easy for some time to come.
Sure. Ambassador, as far as the other stakeholders are concerned, what is it that they are expecting from this summit? Because there are several stakeholders in the region.
The Japan and United States, they will have to impress upon South Korea that they also have their own problems and issues with North Korea. And South Korea should not become so soft towards North Korea that there is some kind of a dissonance between the South Korean position and the position of its allies, main allies, United States and Japan on the other side. But another issue is that sanctions are there. So whatever South Korea can agree to do, it has to be within the ambit of the sanctions, what all they can do. But this visit of Kim Jong-un to Beijing and summit with Xi Jinping shows that their positions will be well coordinated. Whereas there is dissonance between the South Korean position and the American position. That is one thing. And it will be very difficult for denuclearization to proceed. So how to have some steps which South Korea and North Korea can discuss on the denuclearization issue, which would satisfy President Trump when they have their summit. Because otherwise, as Smitaji said, things can go totally out of hand when that summit takes place and some result is not there to the satisfaction of President Trump, because he has surrounded himself with absolute warmongers, and he will threaten action against North Korea, which again will not be liked by South Korea. So it is a very, very dangerous mix, and it has to be played very, very carefully by 4 major parties: China, North Korea, South Korea and United States. I think the other parties are not really very relevant, where even Japan is not very relevant at this stage.
Okay, Professor, this thaw in the ties between North Korea and South Korea and the other stakeholders as well is very, very welcome, but how long do you see it lasting?
Well, both of them, I think, both sides face enormous problems in terms of taking this forward. We know that at this point, there are tremendous problems that North Korea is facing domestically. So I think part of this outreach is to somehow assuage some of those concerns that the domestic population may be feeling. Although ultimately, I think the regime survival matters for the North Korea more than anything else. The other equation is perhaps, what we are looking at is China making it very clear that, look, we will have a greater role in how this unfolds, given the meeting between Kim Jong-un and Xi Jinping. And I think partly the acknowledgement that America has to get its own house in order before anything substantive on the denuclearization front comes through. It is also important that even if the 2 Koreas agree on something, for America will always have an important voice in how South Korea proceeds. So South Korea completely cannot disentangle itself from the American relationship that it shares with Washington, and that would mean that the challenge of how do you move forward in gradual steps becomes even more important. So perhaps what we will see is laying down some basis for the summit with the Trump. But I think ultimately the long-term view on this summit will only arrive once we have heard what Washington has to say about it and how Washington wants to proceed in May. So whatever the inter-Korean dialogue may achieve in the short term, it will be very, very short in the duration, because ultimately what we are talking about is America having an important voice in this because of its relationship with South Korea, and also how it impacts on American credibility. Because after all, if you waver too much in either direction, you are, your credibility is at stake at a time when American credibility, as it is very shaky in the region. So I think this is a hot spot where Americans would like, and their team ideally would like, to have some diplomatic presence where you can actually convince your allies and your partners that, look, America means business, that America is in the game still, despite all the problems, and that America can take this conversation forward as a diplomatic, through responsible diplomatic means. So I think, whether or not this summit produces anything, it would certainly lay down some benchmarks on inter-Korean dialogue. On denuclearization, we'll have to wait for May. But I think even on the inter-Korean dialogue, the ultimate result would come out only after the May dialogue, because both of them have to move in sync with each other. Otherwise, there's too much of dissonance between what is happening in Washington and what I think Seoul, the present government in Seoul, wants.
Sure. I've got time now to take quick closing comments from all my guests, beginning with you, Smita Sharma, on what's the way forward.
Well, there is, of course, that pending baggage and legacy that one cannot forget at this point in time, because there were also talks between Bill Clinton and Kim Jong-un's grandfather, an agreement reached way back in 1996. But both sides, of course, in a way did not keep their word, and we saw that come crashing down. Between the Koreans also, we have seen dialogues take place in the past. But I guess, if this is your best option out here, because for the Americans, they need to remember that Kim Jong-un has constantly said that look at Iraq, look at Libya, what happened to their rulers the moment they were let off, they didn't have their nuclear weapons on them. You took them down. Look at Iran. Donald Trump does not feel like, of course, sort of staying put with a nuclear deal that was hammered out by so many countries through so many nights, troubled nights of negotiations. So a lot of patience will be required and a lot of careful watching. It will be foolish for any one side to go there thinking that I'm coming here from a position of strength. But in terms of sincerity of all sides, it's only something, we can cross the bridge when we come to it. We'll have to wait and see how much of mutual suspicion can be converted into trust at this point in time, step by step.
Sure, Ambassador.
I am optimistic about the North Korea-South Korea summit, and I expect that there will be some positive outcomes and doables, deliverables. But I am very pessimistic about the Trump-Kim Jong-un summit and what will be on offer. Perhaps freeze can be on offer, but whether that will be acceptable to Trump, so that is a very big question mark. But I am very positive about the 27th April summit.
Sure. Professor.
Yes, I think if you have to be positive about something, you have to be positive about the inter-Korean dialogue, because there are possibilities at the end of the day that you can think of that the two nations can accomplish. I think ultimately the big question here would be, can the world and can Washington live with a nuclear North Korea? I think that's a big question on the table, and if we can live with that, then I think the process becomes easier. If our ultimate goal is denuclearization, then I think we are in sort of a big trouble in the short to medium term, because there is no policy available at this point that can successfully handle that.
All right. On that note, then, we'll have to call it a wrap on this edition of The Big Picture. I'd like to thank all my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. That's it from me. See you again next time.